The first thing I remember after the crash wasn't the smell of blood or the sting of broken glass. It was his voice. Calm, steady, like someone who'd been trained his whole life to pull people back from the edge. Funny how I didn't even know his name then, but somehow I wanted to trust him more than I trusted myself. By the time I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in sterile white. Machines hummed softly around me, a low rhythm of survival. And there he was, the doctor my stepfather hired to personally take care of me. Not for love, not for compassion, but for control. Or at least that's what I thought. His name was Adrian Cole, 29, private physician, brilliant in ways that carried both arrogance and grace. And me? I was the patient nobody expected to wake up with a second chance, let alone a new kind of hunger I couldn't name. The accident had torn more than just flesh. It shredded illusions, ripped holes into the fragile story I'd been telling myself. That I was fine, that I belonged, that I was safe living in a world built by my stepfather's money. Truth was, I'd been drowning long before the crash. Adrian noticed. He had that sharp, unbearable ability to see through people, stripping them bare without asking for permission. The first night I woke, still groggy and fighting the weight of morphine, I caught him watching me. Not clinically, not detached. There was something softer in his eyes, something I wasn't supposed to notice. "You should rest," he said, voice low, almost protective. "Why do you care?" I whispered back, surprising myself with the bitterness in my tone. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the foreline, his touch careful, deliberate, and for a brief second the world stopped spinning. Days blurred into weeks, but my life narrowed into the space between us. His shadow stretched across my bed every morning when he came to check vitals, his presence too close and too far all at once. I tried not to crave it, but craving doesn't ask for permission, it just happens. The truth gnawed at me. I wasn't supposed to feel this. Not for him. Not for anyone like him. My stepfather made sure of that, hammering into me what was acceptable and what was a disgrace. Yet there I was, staring at Adrian as if he was the first real thing in a world full of hollow men. And he noticed. The stolen glances, the sharp inhale when his hand brushed against mine while checking my pulse, the silence that lingered a second too long. "Your heart's racing," he said once, after placing the stethoscope against my chest. "Maybe it's the caffeine," I lied, though we both knew better. It would have been easier if he had kept his distance, if he had stayed the detached professional he was supposed to be. But Adrian wasn't like that. Beneath his iron composure, he had cracks. Late one night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him on the phone. "I can't keep doing this. It's not just a job anymore." His voice broke, raw and unguarded. "Not just a job." Those words burned into me, wild and dangerous. Outside these walls, the world was cruel. In America, people like me, like us, existed in shadows. My stepfather's empire thrived on reputation, appearances, and nothing was more threatening to him than scandal. If he ever found out, Adrian would lose everything, and I already had nothing to lose. But in here, in this sterile room where time had folded in strange ways, we were free. Free to look too long, to speak too softly, to let the tension hang until it ached. One evening, as the city lights blinked awake beyond the window, I asked him the question I'd been afraid to voice. "Why do you stay?" He hesitated, then sat down on the edge of my bed, closer than he'd ever dared. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him warm, conflicted, full of something I wanted to claim. "Because leaving you would feel like another kind of accident," he murmured. I laughed then, bitter and broken, because what else could I do? Fate had already crushed me once under twisted metal and shattered glass. But here was another kind of wreckage, a beautiful, terrifying collision of hearts. The thing about falling is it never asks if you're ready. And God help me, I was already falling. That night, after he left, I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of machines. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about the accident or my stepfather or the weight of expectations that had been crushing me for years. I was thinking about Adrian's hand brushing mine, about his voice cracking over the phone, about the way his gaze lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. And I realized something terrifying, something liberating. The accident hadn't destroyed me. It had woken me up. The first time I stepped outside my hospital room, the air felt too sharp, too real, as if the world itself wanted to remind me I was still alive. I held on to the railing of the balcony, every muscle trembling from weakness. My legs weren't ready for freedom, but my chest burned with the need to breathe something that wasn't filtered through machines. And then Adrian appeared, his silhouette cutting against the backdrop of fading sunlight. He didn't say anything at first, just stood a few feet away, hands buried in the pockets of his coat, like he was guarding me from a danger only he could see. "You shouldn't push yourself yet," he said quietly, eyes locked on the horizon. I smirked, forcing sarcasm to hide how badly I wanted his approval. "What's the worst that can happen? Another accident." His gaze snapped to mine, sharper than the cold air between us. "Don't joke about that." There it was again, that softness in him that didn't belong to a doctor. A softness meant for something else, someone else, maybe even me. The nights grew longer, and so did our conversations. At first, they were about safe things, treatment plans, recovery milestones, the weather outside. But walls have a way of crumbling when you spend enough time in someone's shadow. Soon we were talking about music, about the books gathering dust on my shelf at home, about his years in medical school. He told me how he almost quit in his second year, crushed under the weight of expectations and debt. But then, he said, his lips curling into something almost like a smile, I realized healing wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. I wanted to tell him I understood that my whole life had been persistence. Persisting through my stepfather's cold indifference, persisting through whispers at school, persisting through the wreckage of the crash. But I didn't. Instead, I just listened, memorizing every word, every pause. It was safer to let him speak. Safer to drown in his voice than to risk revealing how deep I was already sinking. My stepfather visited only once during those weeks. He came in with his perfect suit and colder-than-ice presence, dropping his gaze on me like I was a failed investment. He barely stayed 10 minutes, and the only thing he said before leaving was, "Make sure you're not a burden." Adrian's jaw tightened the entire time, though he never spoke. But when the door finally shut behind that man, I caught him clenching his fists. "He doesn't see you," Adrian muttered, almost to himself. "Doesn't matter," I said, though my chest ached with the lie. "It matters," he insisted, finally turning toward me, eyes burning with something fierce. "It matters more than you want to admit." For a second, I thought he'd say something else, something dangerous, but he didn't. Instead, he adjusted my blanket and left the room, leaving me drowning in silence. Couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way he looked at me, as if I was more than just a patient, more than just the stepson of his employer. Terrified me, thrilled me. And maybe that's why, when I found him in the hospital garden the next evening, I didn't hesitate. I walked right up to him, ignoring the tremble in my legs and the way my heart threatened to give me away. "Why do you care so much?" I asked, voice cracking in the cool night air. He looked startled, then guarded, like I had cornered him in a place he couldn't escape. "Because it's my job," he said finally, but it rang hollow. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. "That's a lie." For a moment, the world narrowed into the space between us. His breath was uneven, his eyes locked on mine, and I knew, we both knew, there was something neither of us could keep buried much longer. But he turned away. "You don't know what you're asking for?" he whispered, before walking back inside, leaving me standing alone under the dim hospital lights. The rejection stung, but it didn't kill the fire. If anything, it made it worse. Every stolen glance, every brush of his hand against mine when checking vitals, every lingering silence between us. It all became unbearable. I started craving him the way you crave oxygen after drowning. And maybe he felt it too, because no matter how hard he tried to keep distance, he kept coming back. One afternoon, I caught him standing by my bed longer than necessary, watching me with a look he tried to disguise as professional. "You're healing faster than expected," he said. "Maybe it's because of the company," I shot back. His lips twitched, almost into a smile, but he turned away before I could catch it fully. The tension reached its breaking point the night a storm rolled over the city. Thunder rattled the windows, rain streaked down the glass, and the power flickered once, twice, before the backup generator kicked in. I woke to find him sitting in the chair beside my bed, head resting against the wall, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "You stayed," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. He opened his eyes, blinking like he'd been caught in a crime. Someone had to. The room fell quiet again, except for the rain. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out and brushed my fingers against his hand. He didn't pull away. For a heartbeat, we just stayed like that, hands barely touching, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. Then he whispered, "This is dangerous." "I know." My voice shook, but I didn't let go. But so was waking up after that crash. And I don't regret it. His hand finally turned, his fingers intertwining with mine, and for the first time, I felt alive in a way no machine could measure. That was the night everything shifted. We didn't kiss, we didn't confess, but something unspoken bound us together, fragile yet undeniable. And as much as I wanted to believe we could keep it hidden, I knew better. The world outside that hospital room wasn't forgiving. My stepfather wasn't forgiving. But in that moment under the storm, none of it mattered. For once, I wasn't broken. For once, I was seen. The days after the storm felt different, like the world had tilted slightly and I was the only one who noticed. Maybe it was the way Adrian avoided my gaze more than usual, or how his hand twitched every time he adjusted my foreline, as though he remembered what it felt like to hold mine. For me, there was no forgetting. That night had cracked something open. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was survival. The accident had left my body bruised, but it was Adrian who kept my spirit alive. Still, he kept pulling back. Every morning, he walked in with the same calm mask, stethoscope hanging like a shield around his neck. He spoke in professional tones, scribbled notes on his chart, and reminded me of exercises for my recovery. But his eyes betrayed him. Every stolen glance carried an ache I recognized too well. It was a silent war, him trying to protect me by staying away, me trying to protect myself by holding on tighter. I found my strength returning faster than either of us expected. By the end of the third week, I could walk down the corridor without collapsing. Freedom tasted like dust and disinfectant, but it was still freedom. And every time Adrian walked beside me, close enough that I could feel his presence but never close enough to touch, it was torture. One afternoon, we ended up in the hospital library. The place was deserted, shelves filled with old medical journals and outdated encyclopedias. I sat down, pretending to be tired, just to keep him there. "You don't have to hover," I said, flipping through a book I wasn't really reading. His lips curved into something faint. I'm not hovering. I'm supervising. Same thing. His eyes met mine across the table, and for the first time that day he didn't look away. You make it very hard to do my job, he said quietly. My throat went dry. Maybe that's because your job isn't the only reason you're here. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. For a moment, I thought he'd get up and leave. Instead, he leaned forward just slightly, his voice dropping low. You don't know how dangerous it is to think that. Maybe I do, I whispered. Maybe I don't care. We didn't touch that day, but the air between us was charged, like lightning waiting to strike. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it did. But time wasn't on our side. My stepfather returned the next week. This time, his presence lingered like poison. He strode into my room with Adrian trailing behind, all business and sharp words. How's his progress? He demanded, not even looking at me. Adrian straightened, professional mask back in place. His recovery is exceeding expectations. He'll be walking independently soon. Good. Make sure he doesn't slack. I don't pay you to babysit. The words landed like a slap, but Adrian didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his jaw tightening in that way I'd come to recognize, his silent form of rebellion. My stepfather finally glanced at me, his eyes cold. Don't waste this opportunity. I don't tolerate weakness in this family. I wanted to spit the truth at him, that I wasn't his son, that I never asked for his money or his rules, that the only reason I was still breathing was because of the man standing beside him. But I didn't, because I saw Adrian's hand curl into a fist at his side, and I knew if I said the wrong thing, it would cost him his job, maybe worse. So I stayed quiet, swallowing my pride like bitter medicine. When my stepfather left, the silence in the room was deafening. He doesn't own you, Adrian said suddenly, his voice fierce. Doesn't he? I asked bitterly. Every part of my life feels like a transaction to him. Adrian's gaze softened. Not this. Not us. The word slipped out of him like an accident, but it landed in me like a promise. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed every moment we had shared, every glance, every touch, every silence, and realized it had been there all along, quietly building into something neither of us could control. And maybe that's why, when I found him again in the garden a few nights later, I didn't hesitate. The air was cool, the flowers half dead from neglect, but I didn't care. All I saw was him, standing under the faint glow of a lamp, shoulders tense as if he were holding back a storm. You can't keep doing this, I said, my voice shaking, pretending like nothing's happening. He turned, his eyes tired but burning. And what do you want me to do? Risk everything? Lose everything? I stepped closer, my chest pounding. I don't want your job. I don't want your reputation. I just want you. The words tore out of me, raw and desperate. For a long moment he just stared, caught between resistance and surrender. Then, finally, something in him broke. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his hand cupping my face with a gentleness that undid me completely. His lips crashed into mine, and for the first time all the tension, all the restraint, all the fear dissolved into pure fire. The kiss wasn't soft. It was desperate, reckless, the kind of kiss that said we might regret it tomorrow but not tonight. My hands clutched at his coat, pulling him closer, terrified he might disappear if I let go. When he finally pulled back, his forehead pressed against mine, his breath ragged. This can't happen again, he whispered, though his lips trembled against the lie. But I already knew. It would happen again. It had to. The days after that kiss were both heaven and hell. Heaven, because I could still taste him when I closed my eyes. Hell, because we had to pretend it never happened. Adrian buried himself in professionalism, but I saw the cracks. The way his hand lingered a second too long when passing me a glass of water. The way his eyes softened when he thought no one was watching. And me? I was a mess. Every part of me ached for him. Every fiber screamed to break the rules again. But danger lurked closer than I realized. One afternoon, as Adrian helped me down the hall, a nurse passed us, her eyes sharp and curious. Too curious. I caught the look she gave us, the look of someone who had seen too much. Adrian noticed too. His grip on my arm tightened, and when we were finally alone, he whispered, "We have to be careful. People are starting to notice." "Let them," I said recklessly, but he shook his head. "You don't understand. If your stepfather finds out." I cut him off, anger flaring. "Why do you always make this about him? This isn't his life. It's mine. It's both of ours," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "And I can't let you be destroyed because of me." The pain in his eyes gutted me. He wasn't pulling away because he didn't care. He was pulling away because he cared too much. And that, somehow, hurt even worse. That night, lying awake in my hospital bed, I realized something terrifying. I didn't just want him. I loved him. And love, in this world, was the most dangerous accident of all. Secrets have a way of breathing on their own. No matter how carefully you lock them away, they find cracks to slip through. With Adrian and me, every stolen glance, every brush of fingertips was a secret screaming to be heard. And eventually the world started listening. It began with whispers. The nurse who had seen us in the hallway started lingering too long around my room. Her eyes sharp, her smile thin. I noticed her watching us when Adrian adjusted my bandages, when he spoke too softly near my bed. She wasn't cruel. Not yet. But she carried the look of someone who'd realized there was leverage in our closeness. Adrian sensed it too. He grew sharper with me, colder when others were around. He wouldn't let me linger on him with my eyes, wouldn't allow any trace of softness in his voice. To anyone else, he was the perfect physician, dedicated but detached. But when the doors closed, when we were alone, God, it was different. One night, after hours, he came into my room with that familiar tension etched across his face. His shoulders were stiff, his hands restless, like he was fighting a war no one could see. "You need to stop looking at me like that," he said, voice rough, eyes burning into mine. "Like what?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Like I'm more than I am. Like I'm—" He cut himself off, shaking his head. "Like you're the only reason I feel alive?" I finished for him, defiant, trembling. His breath hitched, and for a long moment he just stood there, torn. Then he crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled me into his arms. The hug wasn't careful, wasn't measured. It was desperate, raw, the kind of embrace that said he'd been starving for this as much as I had. "You're going to ruin me," he whispered against my hair. "Then let me ruin you," I breathed, clutching him tighter. But the world doesn't let love like ours live quietly. The next morning, my stepfather arrived unannounced. His visits were rare, but always heavy, a storm that shifted the air the moment he walked in. He strode into the room, eyes cold, voice clipped. "How are you progressing?" he asked, though the question was less about concern and more about control. "Better," I said shortly, avoiding his gaze. Adrian began reciting my improvements, his tone professional, but I noticed his fingers flexing at his side. My stepfather listened, nodding occasionally, but then his gaze landed on me, sharp, probing. "You look different," he said slowly. "Not just stronger, lighter. It wasn't a compliment. It was suspicion. My stomach twisted, but I forced a shrug. Maybe I'm just happy to be alive. He studied me for a moment longer, then turned to Adrian. Keep him focused. I don't want distractions interfering with his recovery. The words lingered in the air, thick with implication. He didn't know, not yet, but he sensed something. And that was enough to put both of us in danger. Later, when the tension had settled, I found Adrian sitting alone in the staff lounge, his head in his hands. He knows, Adrian muttered when I walked in. Maybe not everything, but he knows something. And if he digs deeper, fear coiled tight in my chest. Then we'll fight it. Together. His eyes lifted to mine, filled with anguish. You don't understand what he's capable of. Men like him, they don't just destroy careers. They destroy lives. I reached for him, my hand trembling but steady in its intent. He doesn't own my life. He doesn't own yours. I'm done living in his shadow. Adrian's jaw clenched, his breath shaking as though he wanted to believe me but couldn't. I can survive his wrath. But you, I've already survived worse, I said softly, thinking of the crash, the years of silent cruelty. And I'm still here. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy but charged. Then Adrian reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, a fragile act of rebellion in the heart of danger. We weren't careful enough. A week later, I found the nurse, the one with two sharp eyes, waiting in my room when Adrian left to fetch my chart. She leaned against the wall, her smile thin, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You know, she began, people are starting to talk about you and Dr. Cole. My stomach dropped, but I forced my face blank. There's nothing to talk about. She tilted her head, her gaze cutting into me. Maybe, but I've seen the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. It's not exactly professional. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice low. Because secrets like that don't stay buried. And when they come out, people get hurt. Careers get ruined. Reputations burn. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. If I were you, I'd end it before it's too late. The threat hung in the air long after she left. When I told Adrian, his face went pale. He paced the room like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. This is it, he said, panic lacing his voice. If she talks to your stepfather. She won't, I interrupted, though I wasn't sure I believed it. You don't know that. His voice cracked, raw with fear. We're standing on a knife's edge, and one wrong move. Then let's stop pretending, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Stop acting like we can hide forever. If this burns, let it burn. I'd rather lose everything than keep living like I'm already dead. His eyes locked on mine, wide and desperate. For a moment I thought he'd argue. Instead, he closed the distance and kissed me, hard, reckless, as though daring the world to catch us. The kiss was fire and fury, the culmination of every moment we'd held back. And in that instant, I knew, no matter what happened next, there was no turning back. But the storm we feared came faster than expected. 2 days later, my stepfather called me into his office at home. Adrian wasn't there, he wasn't allowed. The room smelled of leather and money, the air heavy with the weight of his power. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, eyes cold. I've heard things, he said flatly, about you, about Cole. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. People talk, doesn't make it true. His mouth curled into a thin, cruel smile. Do you think I'm a fool? I've seen the way he hovers, the way you light up when he walks in. You think I don't recognize what's right in front of me? I swallowed hard, but I didn't look away. And if it is true? The smile vanished. His eyes hardened, sharp as glass. Then you're not just a disgrace. You're a liability, and I don't tolerate liabilities. The threat was clear, heavy, final. But I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I felt stronger than him. Then maybe I don't tolerate you, I said, my voice steady. His face darkened, but I didn't wait for his response. I stood, my legs still shaky but my resolve firm, and walked out. For once, I wasn't his puppet. I was my own. And I knew exactly where I was going, back to Adrian. The night I stood up to my stepfather, something inside me shifted. For years, I'd been a shadow in his world, a silent extension of his empire, existing only because he allowed it. But walking out of his office, feeling the tremble in my knees and the fire in my chest, I realized I had finally taken something back. My voice, my life. When I found Adrian that evening, pacing in the dim glow of the hospital's empty corridor, I didn't hesitate. I told him everything. My stepfather's threats, his words dripping with poison, the way he'd branded me a liability. Adrian listened, his face taut with fear, his fists clenched at his sides. "He'll ruin us," he whispered, like the words were too heavy to speak aloud. "Then let him try," I said, my voice breaking but fierce. "I'd rather be ruined with you than safe without you." For a moment, he just stared at me, torn between logic and love. Then he closed the distance, pulling me into his arms with a force that left no space for doubt. His lips pressed against my temple, and in that fragile, trembling moment, I knew we had already made our choice. The war came swiftly. My stepfather wasn't a man who gave second chances. The next day, Adrian was called into a meeting with the hospital board, accusations hanging heavy in the air. Inappropriate conduct, unprofessional attachment. It was the kind of scandal that could end a career. I sat outside that room, my hands balled into fists, powerless as voices rose and fell behind the door. When Adrian finally emerged, pale and exhausted, he shook his head. "They suspended me," he said quietly. The words were knives in my chest. "But this isn't fair," I stammered, heat flooding my face. He gave a bitter smile. "Fair doesn't matter. Not when power and reputation are at stake." I reached for him, my hand trembling. "Then we fight back. We don't let him win." Adrian caught my hand, holding it tight, but there was fear in his eyes. "He has everything. Money, influence. He can bury us both." "Then let him bury me," I whispered. "But not you." His grip tightened, fierce, desperate. "Don't you dare say that. I'm not losing you. Not after everything." For weeks, the battle dragged on. My stepfather spread his poison through the hospital, through the city, twisting truths into weapons. Adrian became a target of whispers, his reputation chipped away piece by piece. And me? I became the scandal, the fragile boy who seduced his doctor, the spoiled stepson looking for attention. But through it all, we held on. At night, when the world slept, we found each other in stolen corners, in whispers under the hum of hospital lights. We kissed like fugitives, loved like rebels, clinging to the only truth that mattered, that in a world built on lies, what we had was real. The breaking point came when my stepfather cornered me one last time. He stood in my hospital room, his shadow stretching long across the floor, his voice low and venomous. "You've embarrassed me long enough," he said. "If you don't cut him off, I'll make sure he never works in medicine again. Do you understand?" Something inside me snapped. "No," I said simply. His eyes narrowed. "No, no," I repeated louder this time. "You don't own me. You don't own him. And I'd rather have nothing with him than everything with you." For the first time, I saw him falter. Just for a second, his mask cracked. Then his face hardened, and he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank back against the pillows, my chest heaving, my body trembling. Felt like the end. But it was also the beginning. Adrian and I made plans after that. Quiet, fragile plans built on hope and desperation. He would leave the hospital, find work in another city where my stepfather's influence couldn't reach, and I would go with him no matter the cost. The night we left, the sky was heavy with stars. Adrian drove, his hands steady on the wheel, though I could see the tension in his jaw. I stared out the window, the hospital shrinking behind us, the city lights fading into the distance. For the first time in months, I felt free. Life wasn't easy after that. Adrian struggled to rebuild his career, forced to take smaller jobs, always under the shadow of what had been taken from him. I stumbled through my own recovery, learning how to live without the safety net of my stepfather's wealth. There were nights we argued, nights we doubted, nights we wondered if love was enough. But every morning, I woke to him beside me. Every night, I fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his breathing. And that was enough. Because love, I realized, wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about safety or reputation. It was about persistence, about choosing each other again and again, even when the world told us not to. Years later, when people asked how we met, we laughed. We didn't tell them about the accident or the scandal or the war we fought just to be together. We told them the truth, but in our own way. He saved my life, I'd say. And Adrian, with that same faint smile he wore the first time I saw him, would add, and he saved mine. The accident had broken me, but love, our love, had pieced me back together, stronger than before. And in the end, that was all that mattered. We were free. We were whole. We were us. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.